you represent.
Boa tarde, Marcela Aires da.
Good afternoon. Minister Haddad, in the last G20 meetings in April, you said that economies and markets were being affected by changes and relaxation in the United States, monetary relaxation in the United States. Now we see greater volatility. How do you think the result of the elections can affect the G20 work, especially with regards to the tax war and the reluctance of some governments in advancing in taxation of the super rich? A question for Roberto Campos Neto. The volatility that is impacting risk premiums in Brazil, is that a concern? And to which extent do you see a potential speeding up of the monetary situation and worsening? Thank you. I will begin answering my question. I believe that, yes, there are reasons to believe that whatever is the result of the elections in the U.S. will impact and cause some change in economic policies in general, not specifically in Brazil, but it will certainly have a global impact. And judging from the candidates' declarations themselves, and also with the accommodation of the government, how will this translate into effective policies? But whatever happens will, of course, have international repercussions. And Brazil is a country that is fully connected with the rest of the world in terms of trade, services, finance, and we must be prepared for any scenario. Thank you for your question, Marcela. I believe that going back to the topic of the U.S., there are two topics, actually. One is the uncertainty whether we will have a smooth landing or not in the U.S., and the volatility of opinions has been great. We're leaving a scenario where we would not have a smooth landing. We fluctuated between a scenario without a landing with higher inflation, but we understand that today we have a smooth landing prospect. Another point related to the elections, when we look at the candidates and both the Democrats and the Republicans, they bring three dimensions. One is related to migration, another with fiscal expansion, and the third is regarding protectionism. And all three raise inflation. Migration because of a stricter labor market, the protectionism. So you have these three aspects that raise inflation. And as elections come up, this will certainly impact prices in the market. Now, the risk volatility, we have seen a rise in the long-term rates and the implicit rates, and we have been addressing that. We understand that we will have some announcements in the short term addressing, at least in part, the market's reaction.
Assessments about the proper way of reaching the target to be considered by the directors of the central bank, who are autonomous to do so. Daniel, AFP.
much. I just wanted to ask about the COP next month in Baku. Following your meeting this morning, what are you hoping to achieve next month? More specifically, what level beyond 100 billion do you think would be a good target for the NCQG, the new collective quantified goal? And if I may, on taxation, what do you make of the discussions here about steps taken to tax the super rich, and what concrete efforts are you hoping for from South Africa when it takes over the presidency later this year?
Olha, eu até perguntei para a Tatiana.
I asked Tatiana if this has been the object of some meeting, a bilateral meeting or something specific of the G20, but the topic was never debated in the plenaries of the G20 nor in bilateral talks. But what we're trying to print in the parallel talks to the G20, which I'm now having Minister Marina Silva bilateral meeting, but to look for innovative instruments to leveraging resources for funding ecological transformation and environmental services for the maintenance of tropical forests. It's called the TFFF, Tropical Forest Finance Facility, which has been gaining momentum in the last few weeks, including in an article that's been published by myself, Marina, and the president of the World Bank. This has been also mobilized non-governmental organizations to. So this money is not properly donation, but money that, when it is reloaned, it can lead to a spread that can pay for the financing of environmental services. So this topic has not been dealt with in the plenaries, but it has been dealt with in their own arenas. But there is leeway for at the COP29 and COP30, which will be presided by Brazil, this topic can rise and be approved. Minister Marina Silva has been quite emphatic when she says that the discussions about climate change, about impact, they are done and over with. Everyone knows. And it's in front of our eyes. We are all sick and tired of knowing that climate change has produced and provoked impact. Brazil has been particularly affected, actually this year, both with the floods in Rio Grande do Sul, as well as with the drought in the Pantanal and the Amazon and Middle West region of the country. So we need to look for ways into preserving the ecological collection so as to preserve some resistance to climate change, which is already happening. And Marina has been very emphatic in saying that COP30 is the limit date for a decision-making, for a position, for action in regards to funding climate change. So at the G20, this was not specifically discussed, except in the parallel talks that, always occur whenever we have an opportunity to advance new mechanisms of funding.
Because we have to quit the room, so Thierry, please stand up and introduce yourself.
About the G20, we are here at the IMF. G20 just around the corner. In the Rio summit, in a scenario of a lot of geopolitical uncertainty, 2 wars ongoing, Ukraine, Middle East, Gaza, China coming up as well with an uncertainty with U.S. elections. This will be the most volatile meeting, or volatile and uncertainty, a G20 meeting ever since the 2008. Which we also had a meeting at the IMF in 2008. So how did you speak about those issues, about strong volatility during this period with the G20? And how are you dealing with that? Well, thanks so much for your question. I think that usually and in the last few years, we have always said that it's hard to come to a meeting like this with a global ease in general scenario, so to speak. But we have been following this as a sequence. But on the other hand, this has always been a reality that the market has reacted better to the crises than expected. If we go back to a few G20 country meetings, like when Ukraine was hit, we imagined that there would be a rupture in terms of commercial and trade than we actually had. If you look at the Middle East, we would expect the oil prices would be much higher than they are, in fact. So, yes, it is true that we did have sequential crises, and we need to look at things in a structuring way on how to make economy grow with productivity, with a challenge to pay a high debt, and with a challenge of generating equality. So this is a recurring topic, and this will happen regardless of the crisis. But let me emphasize that yes, we did have many crises, but in general, the market has behaved better than we expected in face of the crises. Thanks. Well, I share Roberto's diagnosis, although I do recognize that effectively there has been a harshening of the risks regarding these topics and they require more attention. Ever since 2008, we're going through a situation that is quite different. There, we hadn't had any crisis. When the 2008 crisis eroded, there hadn't been any crisis like there for many decades. And I think the 2008 is still unfolding. We have not sorted out the 2008 crisis to date. The way I see things, we are going to see the political unfoldings of what came to be called the new liberalism crisis, which occurred in 2008. Both left-wing and right-winged thinkers believe like that, and the unfoldings are still coming, which have not been fully overcome, and that including they can be called back as new episodes of lack of stability occur. So we must do with much care. Brazil has been trying a lot to look for dialogue with several other players to try and address the solutions which will allow us to overcome these obstacles that we face. That's it. Thanks.
Tudo. Agora sim. Eu já usei o Express alguma vez? Não.
Usou Canva?
Já.
Ele é tipo Canva, um pouco menos intuitivo, mas depois pega de jeito. Você quer que eu vou te mandando o link? Você veio? Seria só assistir.
Pode ser muito, né? Eu vou.
Você já tá no nosso Telegram?
Já estou.
Tá. É João o quê?
Jogador.
Ah, eu sou José.
Aham.
Você tá nos grupos já, né?
Sim, eu estou.
Ah, foi isso que fez. Tá no grupo de live?
Estou.
Não, tô achando o José Gabriel.
Esse é o do Gabriel. Vou mandar um oi lá.
Ah, tá como Gabriel.
Mandei um oi.
Certo?
Ah, isso.
Tá, vou te mandar. Mas você dá uma olhada. A senha. Prontinho, se você quiser entrar para dar uma olhada depois em como que é, se tiver alguma dúvida. Eu vou compartilhar minha tela com você e eu vou fazer. Eu vou.
Diga.
Não, eu que vou compartilhar minha tela com você.
Ah, sim, que eu tô pelo celular, tá?
Ah,
E aí, esse seria meu monitor. Tá maior.
eu acho que eu vou precisar entrar esse ar de novo, porque o Express não está abrindo no meu perfil profissional. Eu estou vendo. Já vou, um segundo.
Tá vendo? Sabrina, eu acho que na falha foi na transmissão.
Oi? Tá ruim a conexão também?
Eu não escuto.
Tá ruim a conexão aí?
Não, não sei. Tinha falha na live, na transmissão. Eu acho que com relação ao código.
Peraí.